All right, it is 6 o'clock, and so we will go ahead and start our work session. We do have two items on our work session agenda tonight. The first is the presentation of the Mission Connection Bike Ped Study with Brian Scott and Marty Schugert. And Carrie, are you helping too? Well, the whole team.
Hello. Well, we are really excited tonight to present this project to you all. We were extremely fortunate to have not just one, but two Planning Sustainable Places grants in 2023, and this is the second one of those. A few weeks ago, you had a workshop for the Rock Creek Corridor Plan, and that's going to be before the Planning Commission on June 24th in a public hearing for consideration, and then in front of you all again in July on the 17th for you to consider amending or adopting that as an amendment to the Tomorrow Together comprehensive plan. For the second round of funding, Mission was one of only three awardees for a supplemental grant. They don't usually have a supplemental grant, but there was still money on the table for Kansas municipalities this time around. We took full advantage of that and received the highest score by far, they said. I'm going to quote that as in our proposal. And we had originally, with those three awardees, we were going to only get 25,000 of the federal grant money that we were requesting, which was 55 for federal and then that 20% match. But because the score was so high and they had some left over, they gave us almost the entire request, short just by $2,000. So we almost got that one fully funded as well. So tonight's agenda is the workshop for the Mission Bicycle and Pedestrian Connection Plan, which was awarded that second round of funding. It's an active transportation plan that covers the entire city and contemplates connections to Mission's destinations like parks and neighborhoods, downtown shopping, activity centers, as well as regional connections, not just for our residents here in Mission to be able to take part in the amenities that are maybe kind of close to our borders, but also for those people that are outside of our borders to come into Mission and see what Mission's all about and take advantage of what we have to offer here. This process began back in July of 2023 and has led up to tonight. We selected RDG based out of Omaha as the prime contractor. And there's a little bit of funny story, and you'll see why it's relevant here in a minute. But back in probably early June, maybe, I was out taking a tour with Taylor Cunningham from Mid-America Regional Council, kind of showing her the Rock Creek Trail as part of that first project that we were doing. And we kind of saw out of the corner of our eyes that somebody was taking our picture, and we didn't really think much about it until we were interviewing RDG for this project. And then lo and behold, there we were on the proposal, and we just were like, oh my gosh, that was who it was. But I say that all to say that, RDG and their team has been so passionate and so knowledgeable. And it was evident just from the very beginning, before they were even chosen to win the award, they were here on the ground, traveling from Omaha, here on the ground, he was riding his bike around, taking pictures and getting the lay of the land of Mission to kind of understand Mission more so that they could really kind of put together a good proposal. Yeah, so that was really great. And, also, they won the award, obviously, not just because of the cool picture, but because of the passion that they showed through that process. And you'll see that, the rest of the team too, BHC and Venice Communications that were part of their team are extremely knowledgeable and passionate about this subject matter. There was extensive public engagement on this project. So the steering committee was made up of residents like avid bicyclists and walkers, planning commission members, sustainability commission members, council members. Schmidt and Choicey were on those steering committee meetings. Business owners, nonprofit organizations for folks with special needs. And we met 4 times with that steering committee for this project. And Jane from Venice Communications and I attended the Spooky Walk in October. We had a flyer with a QR code for everybody to take advantage and do an online survey to get their feedback. And there were tons of people that took those flyers and were interested in what we were doing. So I think we got some good feedback from that. Others were invited to attend public meetings, folks from the business community, Mission staff, and then other staff from our surrounding jurisdictions that we wanted to get feedback from about their plans and how we can connect with them. Mayor Flora was also in a lot of those meetings as well and attending and giving us great feedback. So Marty will discuss with you tonight that meter connections is part of those recommendations, the priorities of the network, why this plan will further missions goals of a more sustainable place to live, work, and play by addressing alternative means of transportation to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, providing a means to connect activity centers and amenities to boost economic growth, and by addressing equity by reducing barriers and prioritizing safety for our most vulnerable who may not have great access to a vehicle. We're excited to present this draft plan tonight, and on behalf of the Community Development Department, I can't wait to work on implementing some of these recommendations. Marty, you want to tell them what it's all about?
Well, thanks for having me here tonight. It's really been a pleasure throughout this process to work with Carrie and Brian and the really terrific committee and department heads, and it's really been a nice process. What I'm going to do tonight is give you a test on whether you've read the entire 80 plus, but no, give you, assuming you didn't, give you a little bit of a guide to what's in the document and some of the thinking and so forth and ideas behind it. So first of all, it works. When we start a plan like this, as Carrie mentioned, we really try to learn as much as we can about the community, even before the proposal goes in, which is when I took the famous photograph here, that we need to know mission, to look at the streets, to do some measurements, to see how different things fit together, where the schools are, saw Rushton under construction and so forth and so on. That leads to a mapping of assets, of the things that are continuous streets that can be used. We don't want people to go through routes that don't go anywhere or do a lot of zigzagging. Very important issue, and it's very true of a lot of communities that matured in the period that Mission did, is where there are sidewalks and where there aren't sidewalks. Because it's not all about bicycling. Everybody's a pedestrian at some point, and the sidewalk network is really a fundamental part of this plan. And then also to see where the places that people want to go and need to go are. That is complemented by the open houses and workshops and online presence that Carrie talked about. So these are a couple of photographs from boards at the initial open house, where people identified where they went and where they would like to go that maybe they can't. Some of the boards that we like to use show different kinds of infrastructure, whether it's crosswalks or different kinds of signals or different kinds of bike facilities. And so people then have the chance to put stickers up and say which ones are appropriate to them. We also have a pretty significant online presence, and that presence included interactive mapping. So that funny looking map in the middle is a program that we call Social Pinpoint, and it allows people to put comments which are color coded by whether they're good, bad, or recommendations. And they're very helpful because we can then go over these maps and scroll over those pinpoints and see what people said, as can anybody else who visits it. So there are conversations that take place. Really kind of cool tool. And we use that then to identify issues and concerns and goals, which are the fundamental part of the plan. In a city like Mission, when we come down to, for example, pedestrian access, we cannot put sidewalks everywhere. We can't, people won't support that and don't want to pay the special assessments on it in any case. So being able to show a basic system that will serve all parts of the city effectively and get people to the places that they want to go to is important. From a bicycle point of view, we have a hilly city here. And that's just a fact of life. E-bikes make it a lot easier, but not everybody uses one. So we tend to look at streets that can be converted to bicycle use without a great deal of trouble. I'll talk a little bit about what that means in a couple of minutes. And that helps us to identify the issues and the goals that we're trying to accomplish, which are, when you boil it all down, accessibility and mobility for people to get from where they are to where they want to go. And to do that, not necessarily by driving, but by using their own power. Oh, there, the clicker can be a little slow. So, so in our second open house, we worked out the beginning of a network both of pedestrian facilities and bicycle facilities. And the interesting innovation that I think is a little bit unusual that we like to do, and that comes from my interest in general transportation, is to think of a bicycle and pedestrian system like a transportation system. So it's not just saying, this street could have bike lanes on it, and this street could have a sidewalk on it, and so forth, and evaluate it from the point of view of their fit, but rather to say that this is a point-to-point system and that you can navigate through it to get to the places that you want to go. And so that creates essentially a route structure. And if you had a chance to look at the document, you saw that we identified 15 different routes. Some are long and peripheral, although they can't be too long in Mission, which has the great benefit of being a compact community. Some run east and west, some run north and south. And some of the interesting features of them are the idea of connecting, although this takes private cooperation, the Northwest apartments, which are where a lot of people live, with the rest of the city. That involves looking at Fox Ridge and how we can adapt that street, which isn't always that easily adaptable, to getting people into the city. Very interesting idea in the concept is what we call the braided system through the central tier of the city. So that involves the relationship between the Rock Creek Trail, Martway Street, and Johnson Drive, which is primarily pedestrian. We kind of resisted the idea of trying to introduce bicycles into Johnson Drive, that we had better alternatives in Martway and the Rock Creek Trail to be able to accomplish the same thing. We were also very interested in uniting the north and south parts of the city. We have a big road, Shawnee Mission Parkway, that's right in the middle of that, and that poses a real challenge as well. Each route then has specific roles in the system, which are identified in the charts in the document, which also show which routes are intersecting that people can put together, much as if you were transferring from one bus line to another, except you don't have to wait, which is a good thing. We also looked at regional connections. So Mission is not an isolated rural community. It connects with Overland Park and Roland Park and KCK and even moving into Kansas City, Missouri, and downtown. So we identified 7 connections that lead our system to connect with several major facilities, including ultimately the plaza and the trolley, or streetcar rather. We're not calling them trolleys. We're building one in Omaha, by the way, so we're quite a bit behind you, but we're doing that. But the streetcar and active transportation lines in Kansas City, Missouri, with the Turkey Creek Trail to our west, with the Indian Creek Trail to our south, to Merriam Lane going into the Crossroads District and into Kansas City, Missouri from that direction as well. And these are looking at what we think are usable routes, some of which are marked as bike routes. It was interesting that in the Greenways plan, the Greenways master plan, Mission was kind of left out. And so this provides these kinds of connections that can be made. The plan then goes into different types of infrastructure that apply to our situations in Mission. So we have things like exclusive trails on their own right of way, of which Rock Creek is the primary one, but there would be a couple of others. Side paths, which are wider sidewalks. We don't like to call them that, but shared use paths that are on street right of way that run parallel to the street. In some cases, a directional side path where, and this is Fox Ridge, where we can use the new sidewalk in one direction and we have enough width to do a bike lane in the other direction. So essentially getting people off the street in the uphill direction and using an on-street conventional bike lane in the downhill direction. Enhanced bike lanes, which are taking what we have and making that a little bit better by making the symbols more visible. Cycle track, which is a interesting type of infrastructure and getting to be very popular, where there's a two-way trail, but it's on the street and separated by some form of vertical separation. It's a import from Europe, and something that's being used in a number of places and we think we have the way to use that on Martway Street. And then finally, and importantly, the bicycle boulevards. Bicycle boulevards are basically making use of low traffic streets as they exist today, not solely for bicycle use, but for in a low capital way to make those streets adaptable to bicycling. In our concept, a bicycle boulevard also has a sidewalk on it, so it's filling those gaps where the sidewalks don't exist. And there are a lot of ways to define these. One of my favorites is the one in the upper left-hand corner that I discovered visiting my kids in Los Angeles. That's used that involves doing a painted virtual island with some delineators and a sign that says speed limit 15 with a pedestrian and bicycle sign on it. That does a very good job of saying you can go on this street, but drive slow because there are going to be people on feet and people on bikes on it. So there's a description of all of those things. Facility vocabulary also includes pedestrian facilities. So we are a strong advocate of high visibility crosswalks. That's a term of art that generally involves what we call continental style. Those are the fatter lines, or ladder style. There are different kinds of protected signals, what we call RRFBs, or rapid rectangular flashing beacons, that I'm not a big fan of, but they're cheap and better than nothing. Or hawk signals, which are more expensive, but are also more effective. And some of those are used. There's one on Johnson Drive, for example, in Merriam that is a good facility that actually turns red. So these things are then detailed out in a route by route description. So each of the 15 point-to-point routes and sidewalks is detailed with how long it is, where it is, what it does, what the type of infrastructure is. And then we often have examples where necessary of special illustrations and diagrams to show how those should be built. So a great example is Lamar, which has what we call a standard bike lane. The concept is to make the bike lane more visible by putting a green box behind the bike lane symbol, but also where the bike lane disappears, because at the signalized intersection where there are left turn pockets, to take the bike lane off street and have it cross with pedestrians to avoid getting hit by cars turning right or having a merge. And this is a really good way of making that kind of a street safer for more people. Route details include showing how a cycle track can be adapted to a couple of sections of Martway, one being the piece from Woodson to Roland, the other on the west side from Lamar, well, actually from Woodson to in the other direction to Highway 69 in Metcalf. We looked at how in the world you get across Shawnee Mission Parkway, and so good question. The best way is either going over or under it, and so but that's a big difficult project that is badly needed, and we strongly support it. But in the short term, some ideas for modifying the major crossing at Knoll that will be much better than we have now by making some modifications to the crosswalks and to the way that the center median on Shawnee Mission works. We then go into finally what we call sector detail. So this is taking different like primarily 3-block square areas of the city and showing how all these different forms of infrastructure fit together. That's annotated with call out signs. This is going to be very useful, we think, as the system gets implemented. And then finally go into implementation. One of the very quick and easy ways to identify a system is through signage, which does not involve a lot in terms of capital expense, but really helps to tie routes together. The best way to do this is with the standard manual of uniform traffic control devices system, which almost everybody is using. And there are signs that are directional signs, what we call decision signs that happen at the intersections of the routes, confirmation signs that tell you you're going to the right place, and sort of little directional signs that tell you there's something of interest that you need to go to that's off the route. Finally is a phasing plan that has cost estimates. The cost estimates also include the cost of sidewalks. So you'll see some cases of a bicycle boulevard proposal, which is pretty inexpensive, and you'll see a 6-figure number. Well, that's because it's got 1.5 miles of sidewalk in it. I think in the final version, we're going to break out bicycle-related costs and sidewalk-related costs, and that will make that a little bit more clear. So an initial phase that builds the beginning of a coherent system, a second phase that then builds on that foundation, and a third phase that completes the overall project. And then finally, there are programs and policies. These are based on the so-called 5 E's of the League of American Bicyclists, and they get into ideas for how to satisfy many of the requirements of that and to build a good active transportation system that's not just hardscape, but also involves people and programs. And so with that, that is a quick guide, probably not quick enough, but a quick guide to the plan. Be glad to answer any questions that you have.
Yeah, questions or comments from Marty? Yeah, Trent?
Thanks for this. I really enjoyed reading through this presentation. One of the opportunities that was most exciting for me was the potential to connect to KCK through Merriam Drive or Merriam Lane vis-a-vis Southwest Boulevard. And it talks about there's that abandoned road that goes underneath I-35. And in the report, it said that would require collaboration with the unified government and KCK. And just at a high level, and this might be a question that staff could chip in on too, what would that look like? You know, what kinds of things would need to be worked out looking at a different group county like that? Yeah.
Well, the one lucky thing that we've got is that there are a number of big trails that are multi-jurisdictional. So that's that's helpful. They're mostly in Johnson County, or in Jackson County, but there is a level of intercommunity cooperation. But the other big player in putting a project like that together is going to be the Mid-America Regional Council. So these are really examples of where regionalism needs to work, and that connection is going to be an expensive one. It involves a new bridge, not necessarily building an entire roadway, but at least a trail that goes through that, and generally mutual recognition that that this kind of a project is important. There's another interesting precedent, and this is from an earlier PSP project that involved a study of Merriam Drive and Merriam Lane Drive, whatever, it depends where you are. So the idea of some level of cooperation along that corridor is already there. The other alternative, which may be actually more likely or easier to do, would be a reconstruction of the Lamar Avenue Bridge over I-35 in a way that incorporates a side path with it, which is really kind of a federal requirement now. So there are two different ways of getting that project done, neither one of which is incredibly easy, but both of which would be pretty important.
Thanks. I think
Carrie,
Carrie had her.
I was say, Carrie, do you have something to add
Just
on
wanted
that
to add
point?
to that too, that, we are kind of constantly in talks with our neighbors. We're pulling in people from planning staff and administration from other jurisdictions to explore these ways that we can partner and collaborate on kind of a broader scale than just us in our own little bubble and mission. Those talks are constantly kind of happening among friends at, happy hours and things like that. And that's kind of one of the ways that we get started on some of those conversations. Looking at grants and funding of what's available and how we can partner and pool our resources. We do that kind of constantly behind the scenes too, on staff, and just kind of some informal and more formal ways too. With the two different options there going under I-35, that would be, we'd have to explore with the UG what that would look like, how we could fund something like that, and whether it's even feasible. I think there's some private property there that who knows what really, until we talk with them, what that would really entail. And then over I-35 would be collaboration with KDOT, which we've already mentioned and brought KDOT to the table for that idea over Lamar, to see when they might have that bridge on their project list and what that would entail. And so we've been talking with their active transportation team and department to determine how we could get that done too, and when that might happen. So we've pulled some people onto the in already, and that's kind of how we get started on getting those talks done and working with other people's plans, like with the Merriam Drive plan,
Right.
and kind of seeing the feasibility of making those connections
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. Right now the connection exists, but it takes incredible courage to do it. Different kinds of courage. One is comfort with cars, the other is scarier. But yeah, but they're there. There aren't that many cases of an undercrossing of I-35. And
Other comments or questions for Marty? Yeah, Josefa?
Hi, I
Hi.
have a quick vocabulary question. The only thing that I didn't see defined in there was braided corridor, and I actually don't know what that is, and wondered if you could just give me a
if
synopsis.
yeah, it was a term that usually applies to hair and bread. But it's like taking three strands and braiding them together. So, and rivers too, like the Platte River is considered a braided river because it looks like that. It's got different channels that are interconnected. So basically there are three interesting corridors in the central corridor of Mission. It's a very unusual kind of thing. One is the Rock Creek Trail, which is really comfortable for pretty much everybody. And that's one type of experience. The second is Martway Street, that's got conventional bike lanes on it in one section. So what we're suggesting there is taking the sidewalk widening it to a shared use path, and then doing on the north side a cycle track. So that would be more. So if you're more interested in a recreational experience, you'll be on the Rock Creek Trail, or pedestrian experience. If you want to go to the supermarket, you might be on Martway and use the basic on-street facility. And then the third element of the braid is Johnson Drive. And Johnson Drive would be very difficult to introduce bicycles into, not only because of the traffic that it carries, but also because of the diagonal parking farther down in downtown. And there's actually a fourth element too, and that's 58th Street. And the idea there is that if you're riding a bike from the north, you use 58th Street and then come in on one of the north-south side streets. So the idea of braided is these like strands of facility that are all sort of interlinked.
Anything else?
Good, thanks. Well, there's another iteration that you'll see to kind of wrap up the community participation process and document that, to refine a couple of things. Carrie is an incredibly close reader of documents, which I greatly appreciate, but most of the time.
I was gonna say.
Yeah, but no, she hasn't been wrong mostly, except for one thing. High visibility crosswalk is a term of art in the manual. So
I know there was some language in the plan, around safety and safety for all different users. I had brought up the open houses too. I think the more we can connect that piece in, the better, because we're going to be doing a Safe Streets for All plan
Yes.
as well. And then I know there's additional dollars available
Or
associated
coming.
with that. So that's great too.
yeah, great. Yeah, they all work together. It's good. There's a lot of planning money. It needs to be implemented, but there's implementation money too. There really is. I mean, there's some good things that are being done. Well, thank you very much.
thank
and
you.
Have a happy Memorial Day. Memorial Day.
I was going to add, Mayor, to our next steps. We'll have some further discussion with you all about the plan, but eventually we'll take it to the planning commission for a public hearing. And our goal is to take the plan and wrap it in with the comp plan as an appendices. So it's a living, breathing document that works with the comp plan.
Perfect. Thank you all. All right, we do have a second work session item on our agenda tonight. That is discussion of short-term rental regulations, to be tag teamed by Brian and Laura. Mhm.
Okay.
And Brian, before you get started, could you just introduce Jacob? I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
I was going to.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
I usually don't do PowerPoint presentations, but just to kind of keep myself and the conversation on track a little bit, I thought it'd be good to do that tonight. So, we've obviously been working on a draft short-term rental regulation ordinance and taking a lot of input from discussions with you all, from what other communities, our neighboring communities are doing, and then kind of modeling that after an existing ordinance we have in place, and then sharing that out broadly with the staff for input, as well as Jacob, our city attorney over here. He got a sneak peek of that coming back from vacation last week and gave us some initial thoughts, but this is by no means a final document, so it's still very much in the works. But anyway, I was going to go through very quickly. I don't have a clicker, so you're gonna have to drive for me. So, we often think of short-term rentals as being kind of a popular option for family vacations, especially those that are going to beaches or mountain communities or Branson, like I'll be doing this weekend with my family. But next slide. Really, in the last several years, probably the past decade or so, it's becoming a growing option for those that are kind of seeking an alternative form of housing, especially those on long-term work assignments, or even those that may be experiencing a temporary housing need due to something of the primary residency, such as a fire, some kind of damage, something like that. So we're seeing a lot more short-term rentals, not just in the destination places, the hotspot vacation spots, but really in every community throughout the United States. So it's something that every city is dealing with. And although a lot of, the vast majority of those that rent short-term rental units are very respectful of the dwelling that they're renting and the neighborhood that they're renting in, and are mindful of their neighbors and so forth. There obviously have been many stories we've heard about in the news regarding concerns around short-term rentals. In particular, the large number of occupants that might be in a dwelling unit, large gatherings that may occur, parties, excessive noise, excessive traffic and parking issues. And then oftentimes it's the frequency of the rentals. So it really kind of goes around preserving the character of the neighborhood and kind of the peace and quiet that we often find in residential neighborhoods. Next slide. So a lot of cities, and Carrie kind of touched upon these in the presentation that she gave a while back, they've come up with some common regulations for short-term rentals around the location of the rental. So they sort of define a particular zoning district or area of town where short-term rentals are acceptable and where they're not acceptable. They've often placed a cap on the number of permitted rentals, so no more than X amount. They've placed a cap on the frequency of the rental time, so no more than so many rentals per unit within a given period of time, a month or a year. A lot of them have a requirement to be hosted or primary premises, so that the homeowner is actually at the location or might be away for a little bit, but it's a primary residence. It's not a unit that's just owned by an investor that's renting out the unit on a weekly basis. Then they've also placed regulations around the activities that are allowed at those short-term rentals. Next slide. So some of our neighboring communities have done. Overland Park had an incident at a short-term rental unit in a neighborhood about 2 or 3 years ago. They explored regulations around short-term rentals, and they ultimately decided not to regulate short-term rentals. But what they did do is adopt a nuisance party ordinance. And I'll speak a little bit more to that in a little bit. Shawnee recently adopted some requirements, primarily that rentals be licensed. They limit the number of occupants to 10 per dwelling, and they also stipulate 2 adults per bedroom. They prohibit gatherings with outside guests, so they can't be rented out for parties or events and anything like that where there's going to be outside guests that are attending. And then they require occupants to obey their city noise ordinance. And then Fairway and Merriam have also recently adopted or are considering adopting ordinances. Those have distance requirements of 1,000 feet between each unit. They also require notification of neighbors within 200 feet at the time of the application for the permit. And then finally, a good neighbor policy that specifies obeying the city's noise ordinance. So that's kind of the model that we were using. My initial thought was to actually modify our existing current rental dwelling code, which is chapter 635 of municipal code. And we've had that for a long time on the books. And that requires that any owner of rental property in the city of Mission obtain an annual license from the city to rent that property. And that's mostly for apartment buildings, but it's also for single family dwelling units. So pretty much across the board. We require inspections of 5% of the dwelling units in apartment buildings on an annual basis. It's a kind of a rotating inspection. So we do 5 here, then we do a different 5 next year, then a different 5 the year after. And then we require, if the owner is not living in Johnson County, we require that they have a registered agent in Johnson County. And it's not so much to respond to an incident, as more for service. So if there's ever an issue or a violation of code, we have somebody that we can place service with, and they can appear in municipal court. So that was kind of where we're going at first. And the more I got to looking at that and looking at what other cities were doing and thinking about the discussions we've had I decided just to kind of start fresh. And so I started with an entire new chapter of the municipal code. I just called it 675. And so really is with the current 635 chapter for rental dwellings, we're looking at preserving the safety and habitability of a dwelling unit, making sure that it's safe for the tenant to live there. This has that same component, but it's not emphasized as strongly. It's more about regulating the dwelling units and some of the activities that are occurring in the dwelling units. So we're kind of going back to some of those issues that I just mentioned earlier in a previous slide about keeping that harmonization of the neighborhood that the unit's located in. So first of all, it defines a short-term rental as a rental of a dwelling unit for less than 28 consecutive days. So it's essentially 1 month. The shortest month of the year is February. And it ties nicely with the definition for transient guest tax. So that's the reason we came up with 28 days. Requires owners of short-term rentals to obtain a license from the city. Requires owners to complete a safety certification. So when they're obtaining that license, they would have to go through and basically check mark that their dwelling unit is meeting certain building code requirements. And then they'll attest to that and have that signed by a notary as kind of an affidavit. Requires that the license numbers be posted on the listing in the unit so that when somebody goes to Airbnb or Vrbo, they're looking at a particular unit, that license number is posted on that listing. It also requires that the license itself be posted in the unit. And then finally, it requires that a good neighbor policy be posted in that unit so that somebody can see what our expectations of the community are of the individual that's renting that unit for the weekend. And the copy of that, I believe, is in your packet. Rentals must be for a minimum of 2 nights. So that kind of helps to control a little bit of that rent for 1 night for a big party or something like that. But it's more of a family or a couple staying for a few days. Rentals are limited to no more than 10 individuals total in a unit and 2 adults per bedroom. And that's straight from the Shawnee. Thought that was a pretty good one, so we just kind of pluck that out. Rentals cannot be used for receptions, parties, meeting spaces, or other events that, not tat, are open to non-residents. And then finally, renters shall pay the city's transient guest tax. And the next slide. Then kind of in conjunction with that, we looked at a party nuisance ordinance. And we often kind of think of those two as sort of hand in glove. And I would encourage us to kind of separate that because one can have a nuisance party at their own home. So they don't necessarily ties to a resident or, a rental unit. But we literally plagiarized this from Overland Park. So I thought it was a pretty good ordinance and the chief did as well. So we just pretty much copied it verbatim. And it defines a nuisance party as a gathering of 5 or more people on a residential property that results in any one of the following. There's more, I didn't list them all in the ordinance, but here's some of the key ones. Unlawful sale or furnishing or consumption of alcohol, and that's primarily to minors. Unlawful sale or furnishing or consumption of marijuana or other controlled substances. Any activity that would constitute a violation of section 215.11 of the code, which is our disturbing the peace code. Discharging of firearms, conduct that threatens injury to persons or damage to property, and there's several others that are listed in the ordinance in the code. So that's kind of a general summation. We're here to answer questions or take comments or whatever you'd like to do.
Questions or comments for Brian? Yeah, Cheryl?
Do we have any idea of how many fit this category right now that are being rented in Mission? I haven't gone on Vrbo and tried to rent anything in Mission lately, so.
We've poked around a little bit in Vrbo and Airbnb. We'll find some. They never identify the actual location of the property until you're ready to make a commitment and, sign the dotted line. But we'll look for Mission and we'll find some that are generally kind of in the Northeast Johnson County area. We, as part of our rental license program, we put another line in the application that asks those that were completing the application, the time that they're actually renting. And that's one important component of this discussion. The current rental dwelling program, the code does not specify the length of time for a rental. So it could be, it's kind of soon to be a year. That's typically what rentals are, is 1 year lease. But it could be 6 months, 3 months, a month. It doesn't specify in the ordinance. And so we asked those that were applying for the license, how often are you renting? What's your time period? Most are a year, but we did have some that were 6 months, some that were 3 months, and some that were month to month. I think there was one that was actually month to month. And that was like, I believe 200 units or 200 licenses are being issued. And it's probably about a third or quarter that were less than 1 year.
But we actually, I believe, had no one that identified in that as a period of days.
Right, yeah.
And so we're trying to refine that application because everybody still looked like minimum rental time period was 30 days, which we know not to be true. So I think also when we discussed this a year or so ago, we put some information out and we asked people to share with us any properties that they suspected or thought or knew to be short-term rentals in their neighborhoods. And we had a council member at the time report too, and that was all the feedback that we got through that whole process. So I think our plan is to reach out, whether or not they will be responsive or not, but to reach out to Airbnb and Vrbo and ask for a listing of all properties in our community.
Yeah, Mary, then Trent?
So I guess my question, and thank you for this, like, this is something I'm really excited about. I know Ward 2 is I've received a lot of emails about this one just last week, which I think has been solved, but was just curious, if we do kind of find out, like, let's say this Airbnb is running without having done any of the required things, what's kind of the process to get them there, or does that make sense? Like, are we issuing like notices, or what's kind of,
Well,
what
I
does
think
that look like?
if the city council chooses to adopt an ordinance, this ordinance or something similar to it, we're gonna have to have a period of notification. So let's just say that the adoption is July 1, I would propose an effective date of January 1. And we just put the notice out community-wide. Anybody that has a short-term rental unit needs to apply with the city for a license by January 1st. And hopefully people will be honest and do that. If not, and we catch somebody, and then it'll be some form of prosecution, either notice sent to them, you got to comply with this. If they fail to do that, then it'll probably be a court appearance.
Okay.
And there was a fine for that proposed in the
Correct, yeah.
ordinance, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, Trent?
Yeah, that was actually gonna be one of my questions. I have a couple questions, but so on page 84, it specifies a $500 fine.
Mhm.
And then on page 89, it says it's a minimum of $500 that can go up to 1,000. So is there like a legal reason why we would not just specify a standardized amount between those two?
That I don't know. And that's probably some of the refining that we need to do in the code with our city attorney. So yeah, it's a good question.
And then a couple of things. So when we talk about the owner sort of self-enforcing, being code compliant, is that still something we're confident in, or would there be a room to potentially have like one of our own, code people in-house be able to come out and verify stuff? I mean, I'm just thinking about like a hot water tank or something, your average person, especially if we're talking about like an agent,
Right.
Are we really putting enough trust in that?
And that's another legal question that we need to ferret out a little bit more. So I stated earlier, we're doing inspections for apartment buildings, but not single family homes. That's because of state code. State code prohibits us from doing inspections of single family homes. I don't know if that holds true for short-term rentals or not. So that's a legal question that Jacob's going to help us to answer. So.
And then the last piece was we have that summary document that you guys put together the last 3 pages or so. And I was just thinking if there was an opportunity to potentially make like a 1-pager that was just the clean, most important bullet points that it needs, I just know that.
Yeah, it's a little
no one's
wordy.
Gonna be going through this line by line, and if we could
Yeah.
at least just have one place that's prominent where they can get the quick hits that they need to know, that might be.
Yeah, and I wanted to specifically call out the regulations for the occupancy of short-term rentals as well as our disturbing the peace code and the nuisance party codes. That's why I got a little lengthy there.
It's
I-
good information to have.
You're talking
Yeah.
about the good neighbor guidelines, right? Just for
Yes.
reference.
We
Okay.
can add just like an addendum on top of that, like here's the executive summary and then
Yeah.
everything else can remain. That
Yeah.
just enforce,
My
increase compliance.
thought is maybe actually turn this into a QR code and just having that in the license. So if anybody has a question, they can just take their phone and,
Yeah.
yeah, so.
Thanks.
Yeah, Leah?
So kind of give me a little bit more details on, like the owner not being local, because I think that's kind of one of my things. I don't mind if a local family wants to do this, but if we've got like some investment group in California that owns 15 houses here in Mission that they're turning into Airbnbs,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah, a little bit, it's kind of that balance of property rights and I would assume, again, it's kind of a legal question, sort of uncharted territory here, but if an investment group buys a property with the intention of renting that out every weekend as a short-term rental, they probably have the right to do that, but they need to have somebody here, at least in Johnson County, that can be responsible for that. Somebody that we can call to say, hey, we had an issue last night here. You failed your inspection, you're being issued a summons, you need to appear in court, as opposed to trying to contact somebody out in California to do all of that.
Because I suspect that they're gonna have like someone who's gonna come by and do maintenance and someone who's gonna do the cleaning,
Mm-hmm.
but those people aren't responsible for that property.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it has to be somebody who's gonna be responsible, a registered agent, and the ordinance dictates those responsibilities of the registered agent, and they're basically stepping into the foot of the owner in terms of taking on that responsibility and being willing to be served a summons if there's a violation, they need to appear in court.
Yeah, and I did similarly, Leah, raise with staff, then that I hope we're having council look at, could we put a cap on the number of properties for one owner? And then also potentially a cap on the number of units per parcel or per whatever way the property, a single property is defined. So I think those are being looked at further. Yeah, Ben?
Yeah, that's sort of setting me up perfectly for the comments that I had. It's extremely comprehensive look at and treatment of a lot of the issues that I think have been raised about short-term rentals, but that's for me, the biggest concern, especially outstanding after looking at this, is how many units are going to be short-term rentals in the city, how much of that is chewing up housing stock and affecting sort of housing affordability in the city. And so to that end, I'm quite interested in both sort of the number of units per licensee, as well as, how many short-term rentals we have, what's the density of short-term rentals, sort of the balance between short-term and long-term. I think those things are pretty critical to at least making sure that we're allowing this land use and allowing this property use in a responsible way.
Yeah, Brian?
Fourth it, I guess that I know there's been some precedent in California and Minnesota for limiting corporate ownership of single family homes for the
Yeah.
purpose of short-term rentals. So I'd also just be in favor of, I think, identifying, what's the makeup, I guess, of owners here? Is it individuals? Is it corporate? And then, yeah, be curious into looking into how we could also cap that.
And I think too, if we have some of those more complicated questions, that could also be, handled through an ordinance amendment too. If we have some of those trickier issues that we're not sure on, we could get something on the books and then always, look to add
Yeah.
that as well.
I
Yeah.
think we
Yeah.
can flush these out a little bit in the next few
Yeah.
weeks with legal.
I think one thing to keep in mind is that we're taking a space that's in a residential area and turning it into a commercial space, basically, with it being now a business. And that means that, it's no longer,
Yeah.
families and,
Mhm.
it's now a business. And, how do the other neighbors feel about now there being a business next to their house?
I think that is true though, of long-term rentals as well, that's often a business, or we allow other business uses in residential districts too, but.
Yeah, I think as I kind of described to somebody in staff, if you have a fairly long-term rental, like several months or a year, you kind of get to know the individual.
Yeah,
Like,
sure.
that's Joe, he's come back from work, and where if it's somebody that's just different every weekend, that can be a little disturbing for
it's-
the neighbors
yeah.
and the neighborhood, yeah.
But still an investment property, I guess, at the end of
Yeah.
the day, but. Yeah, Trent?
I also had a question about I know we took it from Shawnee, the 10-person
Mhm.
amount. At first read, it seemed a little high, and I didn't know.
I thought
perhaps
about-
That's the right number, but I just didn't know if we had looked at other numbers for that too.
I kind of thought about it in terms of you have a 3-bedroom house, 2 adults per bedroom. And then you have maybe 4 kids sleeping on a fold-out sofa or on the floor in the living room, something like that. So that's kind of how I framed it, but I don't know if there's a magic number one way or the other.
Well, I want to be clear because if I understand it, it's a maximum of 10.
Right.
But you still, well,
It's 2 adults per
but it's
bedroom.
really driven by the number, but I mean.
Yeah, you could have a child in
It's
the
gonna be
bedroom too.
driven by the number. So if you've got a
Yeah.
2-bedroom house, you're gonna have 4 adults and then.
Yeah.
However
I
many
guess.
kids, up to 10.
It just, I don't know, it kind of, like, we're saying anything over 5 people plus all these other things that happening can constitute a party. But then we're saying, oh yeah, you can have up to 10 people. And like,
Well-
sure, in like a, normal situation, you have
Yeah.
kids and all that, but if it's like 10, 30-something bros, like, they just like rage, is
Yeah.
that, a night is
Yeah.
that okay? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, again, I kind of bifurcate a little bit. So the nuisance party is 5 people. And if they're doing some kind of illegal activity, that's a nuisance party. But then the 10 people could be grandpa and grandma, 2 siblings with their families and kids. And they're just all kind of enjoying some time with themselves, assuming they're not having a loud party. And again, kind of going back to those guidelines for the good neighbor policy, don't talk loudly, don't be slamming cars and setting off car alarms, be conscientious of your neighbors and the neighborhood that you're in and some of those things.
But to get to Laura's point, to get to 10 adults, you would have to have a 5-bedroom house, which we don't have that many of in Mission, right? If it's maximum of 2 adults per
Well, if you
bedroom, or
have,
we could craft it that way, right?
yeah, I don't think the intention is that everyone's sleeping in a bedroom. So, and that's a policy question. So as I said earlier, you could have 3 bedrooms with 2 adults in each bedroom, even a child in the bedroom. And then somebody sleeping on the couch in the living room or something like that. So,
I mean, that's a number we plucked from Shawnee's
Yeah.
ordinance. So if you want to
Look at that
see a
more.
lower number than that, we can certainly revise that.
I don't know if I do or not. That was just something I wanted to ask more about where it came.
yeah, I mean, I kind of stumbled at first when I was looking at that, but then I kind of thought, oh, sort of makes sense. I think through a little bit.
I think what you're trying to do is avoid something ridiculous just in terms of occupancy hazard. Right?
Yeah.
I think if it's gonna be like Brian said, like a nuisance, a gathering, we deal with that under its own sort of heading. If it's gonna be packing so many people in there that there's an actual physical danger, then, that's why we address it. And you think about hotel room, you ever read the fine print on the door? It says you can have like 6 people in here and we'll charge you $10,000. Well,
Okay.
they never do that, but you gotta have something there in case something
Yeah.
goes haywire.
Yeah, I guess
Debbie?
it's-
Oh.
oh, sorry, I was just thinking about the World Cup,
Yeah, that's,
really having everything stress test for that.
Mhm.
I want to tell you, I appreciate the thoroughness that the staff put into this. And we have friends that have Airbnbs. And I will tell you, their yards are pristine. They have taken care to the last nth degree to make sure everything's right. I think it's great to have a framework, and I think you need to start with that. I think it's also good that we have other ordinances to defer to. We have a noise ordinance, we have a nuisance ordinance, we have a parking restriction. So we're covered all around the board. How many people sleep in each bedroom? That's the least of somebody's problem. I mean,
Yeah.
that's their business, as long as they're not obtrusive to the rest of the neighborhood.
And I think sort of to the counter of Trent's bro example, you started at the beginning, Brian, with there could be all different sorts of users. And in
Mhm.
fact, one of my husband's coworkers this week was faced with a multi-day power outage in Prairie Village related to the tornadoes, and his family actually rented an Airbnb in Mission due to that circumstance.
Do you know the address?
I asked for it. I don't have it yet. So that's pending. That was the first thing I asked when Dave told me about it. Any last questions? Yeah, Cheryl?
Well, one of the things that we might do is involve homes associations in this as we develop this, so they can give some input too.
Just out of curiosity, I mean, Cheryl, do you know, does Countryside, for example, some HOAs will
their own rules.
prohibit rentals entirely, either long-term or short-term?
At
As
this
part of the
point in
covenant.
time, I
No.
don't know
Yeah.
that Countryside does, but I know that there's a lot of houses that would fall into this category potentially as people age out.
Yeah, I'm thinking the two active HOAs. I don't think there's anything in their policies or
Yeah.
covenants around rental.
All rental?
Apollo, okay.
I know I've stayed in some Airbnbs where the HOA or the condo association did not want them to be there. And I'm like, I wish I would have known this before I, you know.
All right. Any other final questions for staff? Yeah, Leah?
I just, it would be nice if we could have input from someone who owns an Airbnb here in Mission. I had thought about contacting the one next door to me, but I've given them my card and asked them to have the owner contact me very sweetly. And yeah, that didn't happen.
Yeah. Well, we'll try to see if we can find somebody who's willing to speak. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one thing that I think it's important because we didn't really touch on it in any part of this, but I know Mary had a call from a constituent. We do know that currently there are some multifamily properties that have one or more units that are available as a short-term rental. So we've tried to keep, and I think at least the mayor and I had conversations over the last couple of weeks about capping those as well.
Yeah.
Because I think we'd heard a rumor that we have entire building being converted to short-term rentals, and that addresses and gets at some of those questions of affordability and
A rumor that has not been substantiated.
has not been
correct, Laura?
substantiated, correct.
But yeah, that's what I was meaning when I was talking about like number of units per parcel, preventing an entire apartment complex from changing to short-term rentals, that sort of
Right.
Well,
thing.
and that, on that point, there are some useful ways that manifests when you talk about things like extended stay hotels and corporate rentals. And, I know that's not the majority of the use cases we're thinking about, but let's be careful not to edge that out. I
Yeah.
could easily see somebody wanting to put like an extended stay hotel on the edge of town or something.
Yeah, Debbie?
Remind me what the 1,000 feet was, because you might limit yourself right there with 1,000 feet. I mean, some properties are really pretty close. What was the 1,000 feet criteria?
So Merriam and Fairway stipulated that, just like we did the smoking ordinance a year or so ago, that no rental unit can be within 1,000 feet of another rental unit. So they have to get a permit, and if they're closer than 1,000 feet, then they can't get the permit. So that's kind of the similar methodology to what we do with the smoking
Is
ordinance.
that your proposal?
No, yeah, that's difficult to administer, frankly.
And I'd almost rather they be all together, frankly.
Yeah, Mary?
You mentioned maybe reaching out to Airbnb and seeing if they're able to provide us a list. And I was just curious if you know of any other municipalities who tried to contact Airbnb and get a list. I don't know if there's like a rights issue that they're like, no.
Kansas City, they've had
Okay.
open conversations with Airbnb and Verbo.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think it's just, it's a big corporation, so trying to find the right person to
Right.
contact.
Sure.
But, yeah.
Yeah, and I might have a lead on that, Brian. I know someone in another city who said they had been contacted by, I think it was Airbnb's like local government relations person, so I can follow up and try to get you a name on
Yeah,
that.
that'd be good. Thank you.
Anything else? All right,
No,
thank you so
thank you.
much.
Yeah.
And that is the second and last item on our work session tonight. So it is 7:06 and we are adjourned.
We're going to the